Our scripture reading today comes from the 8th chapter of Luke, verses 26 through 39. They sailed to the region of Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into the solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this to the town and the countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how God has done for you." So the man went away and told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him. Here ends the reading.
The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God abides forever. We can learn from other stories, can't we? Just hearing somebody's story sometimes encourages me, or maybe it gives me something to learn by. One of my favorite things to do is to learn from someone else's mistakes. Isn't that kind of a good thing to do? It seems that a church was holding a group study for husbands, and it was over a number of weeks, and they were just starting to meet. And a new man in the congregation came to the meeting that the group leader didn't know. So during one of the breaks, he went over and introduced himself and started talking to him a little bit, finding out his name and a little bit about him. And he asked, his name was Luigi, and he asked him how many years he had been married. And Luigi responded, "Well, I've been married 45 years. And the leader was duly impressed and thought, "Wow, this is kind of neat, 45 years of marriage." And he said, "Well, if you were to give somebody a secret, I mean, how have you done well in your marriage?" And Luigi said, "Well, I tried to do nicer things for my wife. On our 25th wedding anniversary, we took a trip sent her on a trip to Italy." Wow, a trip to Italy. So, well, you have any ideas what you might do for your 50th? I mean, if you did something like that for your 25th, what are you going to do for your 50th wedding anniversary? Well, Luigi said, "I think I'll take another trip to Italy and bring her home this time." And now you know the rest of the story. Who used to say that? Now you know the rest of the story. Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey was a consummate storyteller, was he not? In the last couple of weeks, I've been looking ahead even to Christmas and things around that and thinking about themes for that and asking God to help me there. And I came across one of Paul Harvey's, one of his best stories that he's told. The problem is you'll have to wait till Christmas Eve to hear it. Stories are important. They really are. They help us to understand ourselves and others. The story of your life is important. Stories of other people's lives are important. It's important for us to hear other people's stories, especially if we're going to establish a relationship with them, that we might help them take another step in faith toward Jesus Christ. God may use their story to help us know what is a good step to take, a next step to discern that in helping someone take their next step toward faith. I talked about that last week, and we shared some about that and thought about what kind of next steps we can take. And listening to other people's stories, it is important for us to think about how we might share, not only in their story, but how we might share our story in relationship with others. Jesus often used story, didn't he? He often used stories to teach people. What are some of the stories, just off the top of your head, what are some of the stories that you remember that Jesus told people? Somebody. The parables, there are different kinds of parables. What are some of the specific stories? Can you remember one? The prodigal son. Others? The woman at the well, he told her something about her very life. How about the lost coin, the lost sheep? The prodigal son was right there with that. There were three stories: the lost coin, lost sheep, lost son, in a way. Say? Lazarus, yeah. He raised him from the dead. He told about that. Some of the stories that he told helped them to learn things of God. And some of them, for instance, the widow's mite. That was another story Jesus told. Or the guests at a wedding. Or the maidens who were waiting for the bridegroom to come. And the list goes on and on. There were a lot of stories that Jesus told. And I think one of the reasons that he told some of those stories, or some of the reasons why, it may be easier to remember a teaching through a story. If we can remember the story, we might be able to remember the theme or the idea behind what Jesus was teaching. Or even if we don't understand exactly what Jesus was teaching, the story might stick with us, and we might be able to think about it at another time and start to think, now what exactly did he mean by that? A lot of the stories that Jesus told have kind of a surface level meaning, and then as you think about them a little bit more, there's a lot of truth that just lies right below the surface in a way that helps us to grow deeper in Christ. And so sometimes Jesus asked people about their own stories. Again, last week we saw how the woman at the well, he asked her about her story. She told part of her story and withheld another part of her story. She said that she had no husband, but indeed she had had 5 husbands, and the man she was living with now was not her husband. And so she kind of, like sometimes we'll tell a part of our story, a part that doesn't get us necessarily in trouble too much, right? And so we'll tell that part of the story at least in talking to others. This week, we heard how Jesus found out some of the story of a man that had been possessed by demons, or maybe he discovered some of the story of the demons themselves. I don't know. And they certainly knew his story, didn't they? When Jesus spoke to the man, the demons kind of spoke through him. What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me. But Jesus commanded the evil spirits to come out of the man. Sometimes it's unclear exactly who was speaking, whether it was the man or whether it was the demon speaking through the man's voice. Definitely, they knew who Jesus was. Somehow that was communicated. We know who you are, Son of the Most High God. Have you come to torture us? But Jesus didn't come to torture. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. That's good news, isn't it? Sometimes people get caught up in the idea that God is all into torture and all those kinds of judgment. But Jesus came to seek and to save that which was lost. Jesus didn't come to make our lives miserable. He came to give full life, abundant and free. Now, it's interesting to me to see how Jesus went about ministering to the man who was demon-possessed. One of the first things he did was ask the man's name. Now, again, we never really hear the man's name. We have no idea who this man was. But again, the demon spoke and said his name was Legion because there were many. who had possessed the man. Jesus wanted to identify who he was speaking with. I don't know if it was to find out how to deal with that demonic oppression or that possession, but most of the time it's good to know what or who you're dealing with, isn't it? For Jesus, that meant dealing with legion, a number of demons. And for that reason, Jesus wanted to know the name of legion. For us, there may be a lot simpler explanation for us asking the name of someone whom we're talking to or someone whom we're establishing a relationship with. Showing true interest in establishing a relationship with somebody begins with being personal, and it means knowing their name. I was talking with somebody a little bit earlier today. Names have been difficult for me. They always have. I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe I just don't focus and concentrate and pay attention. But sometimes names have been difficult. We talked about the possibility of whether it was because I'd served several congregations that names were even getting more difficult for me, or whether it's just I was getting older. I don't know which. Maybe it's a combination of those two. But it's important to know someone's names. Most of the time, it's good to know you are, where you are. And showing true interest in establishing a relationship, again, begins with knowing their name. John Maxwell is a motivational speaker. He was a pastor of a number of churches. He eventually became the pastor of a very large Wesleyan congregation. And there was a staff there of other pastors as well, not just John, but he was the senior pastor. And they had a group of people who were becoming members of the church. And so the leaders of that group of people, as they were meeting together, invited them to write down something that they wanted to do as a goal in their life, in the life of that congregation. What was a goal that they had, maybe of being involved in the congregation? Well, a young lady in the group started out by just saying, I want the senior pastor to know my name. Now, in a congregation of several thousand people, it was difficult, obviously, for the senior pastor to know everybody's name. But someone in the group got that card to John Maxwell, and the next Sunday morning, he went directly to that young lady and greeted her by name. And she turned to the people who were around her and said, he knows my name. He knows my name. If we're going to establish a relationship with somebody, they want us to know their name at least. It's a part of knowing their story and a part of being able to share even our story with them. And something else we can learn about the response is we might hear from people. I don't know all that there is about demons, but I find myself wondering why they didn't turn to Jesus when he confronted them. Why they just consigned themselves to either being tormented or sent into a herd of pigs. I don't understand all of that. But as I thought about that, a thought that occurred to me was there is sometimes, in the same way, some people anticipate their end of story, and they anticipate that it might not turn out good, but they refuse to change the course of their lives. Some people just get caught in the storyline as it is and don't realize that Jesus came to change life stories. Well, something that maybe it might be good for us to hear is that we're not responsible for how everyone might respond to our story. Some people, for whatever reason, just have a roadblock and they can't hear our story. Or if they hear it, they only hear it to make fun of us. I saw an interview online this past week, and I thought, why are they even talking to each other? Because they weren't talking to each other, they were talking at each other. interrupting each other, talking over the top of each other. Nobody wanted to understand anybody else. They just had their own set of ideas and understandings, and nothing anybody was going to say was going to change it. And part of me was thinking, what's the use? Why do we like such abuse? Some people just will never be able to receive your story. But that's not your responsibility. It is our responsibility, I believe, to make our story understandable and to share it with somebody in a way that they can receive it if they're open to receiving that. And I'll say more about that in a few minutes. But for now, we need to remember that some people will just refuse to believe, and they will not believe even if they met Jesus physically, face to face, right here in the here and now. They wouldn't be convinced. Now, something else that I think we can learn from that story of Jesus and the man was that some people may distort your story. They may take your story and turn it inside out. They'll use it against you instead of for you, or maybe even use it against Jesus. Let me read a section of that again. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Verse 37 says, "Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left." Something about the way those people told that story of what they had seen with those demons. Now, I've got to admit, it kind of freaked you out, wouldn't it? Seeing demons, or if you don't see the demons, but you know what is going on, and you hear some of, "Let us go into the pigs," and they go into the pigs, and pigs rush down a bank and into the river, and they're all drowned. That kind of freaked you out. It's a little bit weird. You just don't see that every day, do you? But sometimes the way a person tells a story will make all the difference in how a person will respond. You've probably heard someone tell a story about their own life, about some spiritual experience that they've had, and it seemed to be more about the Twilight Zone kind of thing. It's got kind of a weird twist to it, and sometimes the way they say it can bring about more fear or something kind of the weirdies kind of thing, rather than bringing about faith. They tell it in a way that lends itself more to the strange and mysterious instead of the peace and joy. Here was a man, when they came to see what had happened, here was a man whom the people knew. I mean, this man was well known. He didn't wear clothes. He lived in the tombs. They had tried to contain him before, were unable. I mean, the people knew this man. And when they came out to see him, he was clothed and in his right mind, the scriptures say, sitting with Jesus. Isn't there a sense of peace in that story, in the outcome of that story? And yet something in the way that it was told to them, the people were afraid. And they said to Jesus, "Please leave us." Some people will distort your story, and some people will not be able to hear your story right now. You may share it simply and clearly and with faith, and they'll not be able to hear it right now. They may need time to mull it over. They may need time to process it. They may need to hear the story of Jesus from someone else, somebody that they can connect with for some reason. But notice that Jesus did not force his way into their lives or into their community. When they pleaded with him to leave, he got in the boat and left. Jesus did not force his way into anyone's life, and he won't yours. He never does. So we dare not force our way into someone's life either. When I was in high school and went to some lay witness mission weekends, I remember being on one mission where I and two other teenage team members stayed in the home of a family that had a couple of kids, and one of them was a little bit younger teen. And one night we were up kind of talking kind of late and listening to different kinds of things and doing some stuff. And one of the guys kept wanting to talk with this other kid, and on and on and on, just trying to convince him to commit his life to Jesus. And even though the young boy was exhausted and you could see it and he wanted to just go to bed, this other guy was just convinced that if he could just say just a little more, just a little more, just a little more, it would make a difference. But it didn't. Our stories can be simple, short, to the point, and allow God to use them to touch someone else's life. A few weeks ago, Jim Eggleston told me the story of when he had the opportunity to go to help some people who had experienced a tornado. And they were taking some food and things to them just to help them out in the process of their kind of working through the debris. And there was one gentleman, he said, that they went to and gave him something to eat there and just stopped to hear a little bit of his story. And Jim said that the guy had been working through the debris and was just about ready to give up. And then he said, and then you guys came. And he said it in a positive way. You came and it made a difference. I was just about ready to give up and just call it quits. And then you guys came. There was something in their willingness just to be there with him and to hear his story and to give a little bit of food that made a difference in somebody's life. Sometimes things get so bad we just have to tell our story. But sometimes things get so good we just have to tell our story. It doesn't have to be the whole story. Just telling a part of it can make a difference in our own lives and in the lives of others who may be far away from God. So, here's a simple step that we can all take this week. Here we go. Here's a simple step that we can all take this week, and that is this. In 100 words or less, write down your own faith story. In 100 words or less, write down in your own faith story. In just a few sentences, write about the difference that Jesus is making in your life. You can use your own salvation experience in just a few sentences. Again, you can share what life was like before you came to Christ, and then write a little bit about what difference Jesus has made in your life. And it will be your own kind of a before and after story. Or you can use a recent reality. It doesn't have to be something of a life-changing nature in the past. In just a few sentences, you can talk about a difficult time in your life and how you felt God's presence in your life during that difficult time, and how He made a difference and how it has changed you for today. Or in a few sentences, you can share about one of those times when you really felt blessed by God and encouraged, and it made a difference in your life. And you can talk about how you felt God's presence and what a difference He is making in your life. Think it over and write it out. I think sometimes it's good for us to just think about where we are in our relationship with Christ. So think it over and write it out. How would you tell someone about the difference that Jesus makes in your life? And if you would like to, you can share it with me or with someone else, a friend, and say, how does this sound? If I was to tell this story to someone, how would you think it would sound to them? And it's just an exercise in being able to be prepared for those opportunities where a conversation turns spiritual, that you would be able to walk through that door gently and lovingly and share your faith. Now, in the book, Just Walk Across the Room, Bill Hybels gives some cautions about what to do and what not to do, some pointers. And for instance, One of the things he cautions about is what he calls a weird God story. Again, it's kind of like that Twilight Zone. Don't tell someone about the last Twilight Zone story you had with God, you know? You know, there was the first church we were in, there was some people who used to, we were fairly young then, right around 40. No, I was younger than that. I was around 30 when we first started pastoring, 29 years old, and there were some people who were still kind of athletic and enjoyed playing basketball and volleyball. And so we would go to a place there. There was a campgrounds where there was a gym, and we would play volleyball. And somewhere along the line, somebody would say, "What's the score?" And there was one guy there who always said, 10-10. He didn't care. He didn't want to keep score. He wanted to have fun. 10-10, it was just always 10-10. And there'll be times when I'll look at the clock and it'll say 10-10. And I'll say, "Hey, Andrea, remember that guy?" Or you look at the clock in the middle of the night. You ever got up in the middle of the night and it was 2:22? Or 3:33 or 4:44? Listen, that's not necessarily a weird God story, so don't include that. You know? Don't use those weird things. There were some people that I've known in my life that they would talk about spiritual things, but when they would talk about them, it was more like, whoa. Rather than the peace of God that just blesses our lives and encourages us. You know, those things where it's, leave it alone. Don't use that as your introductory story to tell somebody about Jesus. Now, the second thing we might be careful about is being long-winded. Hello. I already gave the example of that guy on that lay witness mission. I finally gave up and went to bed. The other two of us were trying to say, "Come on, let him alone. It's time to go to bed." And there are other helpful hints that you can read about in the book, or that you can be a part of if you go to one of the small groups. And you can join a small group even this week to hear some of those encouragements and some of those challenges. So one of those groups meets this morning right after worship, about 11 o'clock. So you can go downstairs and meet with that group. And another one meets tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Both of those meet in the lower level. All three of these meet in the lower level. And another one meets Tuesday evening at 6:30. So tomorrow's is at 10 a.m., Tuesday evening at 6:30, and one right after worship. You can be a part of one of those groups and talk about those things and share some of those things and hear some of the cautions and hear some of the positive ways that you can share your faith. You can become better at sharing your faith story with others if we'll just take that step today. Now, the last thing I want to say about what I see from Scripture this morning is when Jesus was asked to leave the Gerasenes, he did not insist on staying and forcing his way into the lives of the community he left. But remember what he told the man who had been demon-possessed? The man wanted to go with Jesus. I mean, Jesus had just changed his life. And he said, "Let me go with you, Lord." And Jesus turned to him and said, "No, return home and tell how much God has done for you." It's just that simple. So the man went away and told all over the town how much Jesus had done for him. You can do it. You can learn to share your faith story. You can become prepared to engage people in spiritual conversations. God will help you because even though it's your faith story, it's also the good news story of Jesus through you.